One way the Imam and I are similar is that we came from immigrant families, although mine arrived about the time this church was founded in late 1800s. His arrived more recently. And I was thinking about my grandparents and my great-grandparents and what they valued and the way that they taught the generations that followed them. One of the things they valued was politeness. My grandparents were extremely polite. They tried to teach us, youngsters, to please and thank you and all the things that we hope for our children. But I realized while I was thinking about them that their politeness was a predecessor to tolerance, because they weren't very tolerant people. My grandparents did not like that my mother, a Christian, married a Jew. Actually, that was quite a big problem in our family. There were prejudicial things said by grandparents and great-grandparents about people of color, about gays and lesbians, about all kinds of differences that they could not imagine. Now, I would hope that they would have changed, but I know where they came from and what they had to overcome. So I was thinking about them in the context of then my parents, my mother especially, who grew up in the New York area in the West Side Story era, the 50s, and the influx of immigrants from Puerto Rico and other places, and how she learned tolerance from what she grew up in. So she had made an improvement on her family. But even so, that society was rather segmented. It was not very diverse. So diversity wasn't really a value in my parents' life until they were about my age. The culture I grew up in was multi-ethnic, multiracial. And so I learned about the value of diversity. That people coming together had different things to offer. But what I didn't learn, and what my children are now learning, is about inclusion, is about privilege and bias. And how, as white people especially, it is now our turn to hand over power, to hear voices, to believe that there are just as valuable perspectives in the world as ours. That same trajectory from politeness to tolerance to diversity to inclusion could be said true in religion and in what we need in our world. Now that all makes this an interesting moment, because 100 years ago, or more, 116 years ago, this church was founded at Temple Emmanuel. Because when the Unitarians gathered in the Christian city of Dallas, the Unitarians, not the Trinitarians, there was no place for us to worship except in the Jewish temple. 16 years ago, in the sermon that formulated our congregation, Daniel Limbaugh, the soon-to-be minister of that church, said this: "I am glad to appear before you tonight for the purpose of addressing you upon the subject just announced, which was Unitarianism in Dallas, 1899. He said, "As far as I know, the occasion tonight is one that is unique in the history of Dallas. In the East and West, where Unitarianism is better known, it is no uncommon thing for Jewish and Unitarian ministers to exchange pulpits, and indeed the two congregations frequently unite in one common service. There is no reason why upon occasions they should not. We have one God, we believe in one God, and we surely there is a platform broad enough for the whole human race to stand upon and unite in his praises of him, in whom we live and move and have our being." It's fairly incredible that over 100 years ago, Jews and Unitarians could come together, at least to tolerate one another. 43 years ago, 73 years after that speech, Muslims came to Dallas to seek a place to pray and worship, and they found us. The Richardson Mosque was formed. They met in Channing Hall, where you may have brunch afterward. And they prayed in that hall because no congregation, no church would allow them a space. Interestingly, when I told the imam that story, he said, "You know, that's the exact same story I heard in Rockford, Illinois," which makes our work toward tolerance just a little more legitimate. For the last 13 years, we have reunited our friendship with the mosque. We have had groups visit. We have taught each other about our religions. And on September 11th, the 10th anniversary, a young woman from the mosque spoke right here at this pulpit. Our faith says to act on tolerance, to move past polite engagement, and to even move past tolerance, to even move past diversity to inclusion. That is the goal. And it means that we as Unitarians have to fight the temptation to label others as good or evil, to seek ways to overcome differences and understanding, to look for the good in people and to speak when we must speak. The challenge to tolerate when intolerable. Last Sunday, my colleague Aaron spoke of the attack on our Muslim brothers and sisters. Even a legislator in our state house barring Muslims from her office unless they made some declaration. Imagine a congressperson putting a sign on the door, "No Jews." What would happen? No Unitarians. This is the context we live in. So the question is, can we be tolerable of those who are intolerable? Can we be tolerant of those who spit hatred or act with violence in the name of religion or identity? Our faith's only answer is to try to see the suffering in hateful speech, in hateful action. To try to go past the image of the person to the depth of who they are. It asks us to keep the boundaries for sure, but to see the other as God's children. And to attempt, in the name of inclusion, not to create an other label where we are tempted. This is a conundrum. None of this is easy, not in our own lives or in society. Surely you have people in your lives that are intolerable. So you, on a personal basis, know what I mean. The only approach I can see from our faith perspective is to take small steps, to find friends, to not claim to know the answers, to count on the fact that trying to do the right thing is okay. And when we can use our privilege to stand in the line of fire for those who are under attack, we do so. And when we can give over power to others to hear their voices, not just to see their differences, we do so. The antidote, my friends, is dialogue. It's finding a way to rest in the palm of the mystery of God and know that history is changed by small acts. That's why we are who we are, because of those people that met in 1899 with the Jews of this town, giving them hospitality, and we in turn gave hospitality to our Muslim brothers and sisters. That's why the poem that Beth read is so important, because it says even the smallest act can change the course of history. The man who picked up the glass so the grandmother didn't cut her foot and have to stay home changes the course of a life. And so today, in our coming together, just in the fact that the Imam and I are here with you, may change the course of the history of this church. And 100 years later, people may look back on this day and say, this is why we are who we are, because people in 2015 came together, Muslims and Unitarians. So today we push past tolerance, a weak virtue. We push past diversity, just seeing each other, toward inclusion, toward friendship, toward a wide embrace. And so I've invited my friend, the Imam, to speak now to us.
So if inclusion is the end result, I don't claim that I know how to get there. I really don't know. I may have some ideas, some suggestions, but ultimately speaking, every time humans are involved in something, it complicates things. Perhaps it would be easier if we were widgets or gadgets or something of some sort or the other, but each one of us is unique. And part of what makes our ability to truly come together in a way that each person is going to feel safe is exactly that quality of safety. And I can speak a bit more on the aspect of someone who this month, my parents came to America 40 years ago. And being that the majority of my congregation are still first generation, one of the problems or one of the challenges that we have is a fear of losing themselves, because their identity is basically who they are. And they're coming into this ocean of America with waves of different people, waves of different cultures. And so there's this challenge, which is, how do I balance being able to function in a way that allows me to provide and care for my family, and to still be part of this larger community of people without losing who I am and what I am. And that identity is, of course, it's a religious one, and it's especially a cultural one. Especially when, unfortunately, diversity of culture is not something that is really celebrated. What do you call a person that can speak 3 or more languages? Multilingual or a polyglot, right? What do you call somebody that can speak 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who could only speak 1 language? You guys know this already. Right. See, and I thought I could pull one on you. I think there's other Jerseyans in here. And so when we have different names, we have different complexions, we may not have a grasp of the language, and if we do, we have very strong accents. There's one foot that's still overseas back home because perhaps parents and the majority of the family is still there. and yet the other foot is here, and we realize that roots are now being established with our children and all. It's hard to be straddled like that. I consider myself an American, but I don't forget about my heritage, and I'm proud of it, that I don't see anything of a contradiction or anything of a problem with that. But unfortunately, there are still plenty here within America that do. How do we refer to our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, just past the border, just yonder? Aliens. You don't want these aliens coming into our country, taking our jobs, changing our way of life. And what are they talking about? They're talking about Mexicans, who the majority of them are Christians, Catholics, whom, if anything, the shared history of, let's say, Texas, to be a bit more specific, and Mexico should be one of like this. I couldn't imagine that what took place 2 weeks ago of people protesting, saying, there's no Allah in Texas, that somebody would raise a sign saying, there's no Dios in Texas. But language barriers are there. Our cultural barriers are there. And whatever other barriers may be. But I know that Islamically, inclusion has always been a part of what Islam has taught. Why? Because, as you recall from the verse that I recited, it was part of God's ultimate plan that He created us to be diverse. And it's a miracle that even though we all come from Adam and Eve, as is part of our belief, that we have all of this diversity. And it's not so that we could all keep within our cubicles or within our side of the street and so on and so forth. God Almighty didn't intend for us to be hermits even though we live within megatropolises. Rather, it's so that we can get to know each other. That's part of the beauty of life, is to be able to learn and to experience that which is different from who and what we are. And in the same way that we can appreciate the beautiful rose that was handed to the new members, in and of itself it is just splendid. Its fragrance is superb. But when you see a bouquet, it's beauty upon beauty, and as human beings, we are a bouquet of people. And when we can appreciate each other in that way and realize that each one of us further enhances the greatness and the beauty of the other, I think we would come to enjoy life even more.
Stay with me. Stay with me. So we have a few minutes and we want to dialogue. So we talked about this before. It's live now. So what do we do when part of the bouquet exhibits hate for the other side of the bouquet? People stood out inside of the mosque and said, your prophet is a child molester and horrible things. You told me that your people wanted to go out and, some of them wanted to take care of it and some of them wanted to serve them water. We've had similar situations here. How do we interact, and what's the source of that interaction between those opposites or those poles?
I'm convinced that there are some people who they like to fight. They may be aggressive. And those types of people, how do you deal with them? Put them in the octagon and let them figure it out UFC style. But ultimately, for the rest of us, I think that to be able to talk and realize if you want to fight, we're both going to lose. But if we're able to communicate, we can come to learn some stuff that is going to ultimately have a return for myself, and in doing so, that hopefully I can walk away becoming a bit more enlightened and perhaps a better human being.
Yeah. I think some of the core of what we're seeing in society right now around the people standing out in front of the mosque, is fear.
There's fear.
It's the other side of the fear of the community that has become so diverse and so mixed that some want to pull away, some want to pull it and say, there's some ideal that's from the past that doesn't include you. And in that fear, there's also assumptions made about who you are, just like the signs outside that said, go home, and you said, where, to New Jersey?
Not only that, but they said, take Obama with you.
Yeah, right.
I'd like a trip to Hawaii, but I don't know if he's going to take me.
I'm pretty sure he's been to New Jersey, too. You know? Because I think what we're getting at is, unless we know each other, we make assumptions. I want to tell you a story about when we met at the hospital. We were at a conference, and I introduced you to Beth, and she reached to shake your hand, and you went like this. And I assumed sexism in Islam. I made an assumption about you. And then I thought about it, and knowing, having lived in the Middle East and also in India, that maybe that was a way long ago to protect women from being groped and touched. And then we talked about it, and so the understanding got deeper and deeper. But if we just leave it at the top layer, we can easily remove ourselves from reality. And I think that's the danger, and so that's why I think you coming here today and our dialogue and our friendship and hopefully our congregation's friendships develop so that we get below that surface.
I hope so, and that's, to be very honest with you, and that's my policy, is to always be honest. I told Dan, if it's okay to say Dan in front of the congregation like that.
They used to call me Danny in New Jersey, but don't do that yet.
Danny boy, okay. I believe that what happens between the two of us of a friendship is something that hopefully should be visible, and it should trickle into our congregations. We all have fears, and perhaps the biggest fear, if it can be underlined, is a fear of change, because change brings uncertainty, and we're just naturally people that are afraid of what's uncertain. This is why all of these fears and speculation of tomorrow and the economy and China uprising and aliens crossing over the border and all of these things, they stir up these fears. And if there's no way for us to have really meaningful relationships, understandings, those fears remain unsettled. But when you get a chance to meet someone who may be from that particular background, and you get to scratch a little bit beneath the surface, and you find out that their name has a meaning, and it's a pretty cool meaning, and you find out some things about their culture and about their values, and you realize that, hey, those are things that I also identify with. And you realize that at the end of the day, they also have fears and concerns that are towards us, that we realize we're all afraid of something. And it's whether or not we continue to allow these fears to really be something that dictate the way we're going to choose to interact with each other, or we're going to look those fears in the eye and realize that together we can overcome these fears, and in doing so, it actually builds a stronger relationship, a stronger community, a stronger country, and a stronger world.
Imam, thank you for being here, friends.
Thank you.